peer contact as well as motivation have emerged as two important difficulties, challenges that face higher education students last year and I guess this year as well, after institutions took teaching online, all in response to the pandemic and the lockdowns. An in-depth survey conducted by the Independent Institute of Education provides a quantitative and qualitative look at how public and private universities responded to last year's challenges, as well as the impact of various strategies and approaches on students. Joining us now, Wednesday lunchtime, Director of the organisation, Dr. Felicity Coughlan. Doctor, good afternoon to you and welcome. First of all, very briefly, what did the survey set out to achieve?
What we were wanting to look at was to try and understand the experience of students in a way that would enable us to handle things better this year. I think everybody went online in such a rush last year, but nobody is under any illusion that we're not going to have to do some form of hybrid teaching, at least for the foreseeable future. Your comment earlier on vaccines being, pertinent to that point. So what we were trying to do was to try and understand how do we then normalize with a high quality learning experience, taking into account how students in fact experience what it was that we did last year.
And what is concerning students, as I mentioned, lack of peer contact and motivation, but you'll tell me, of course, those two are intertwined, are they not?
Well, yes, they are. The interesting thing is that we were expecting students to speak much more about the actual process of teaching and learning, but we discovered that students' expectations were very calibrated on what the institution had already been able to do. So if they were in an institution in which technology was already deeply embedded, then their expectations were very different from students who were in an institution in which technology wasn't embedded. So the depth of the experience wasn't the technology. It was about students feeling that loss. Students opt, particularly young adults, opt for contact education because of both its educational and social benefits, and those are intertwined. And what students found was that the isolation, and again, this is, I guess, not surprising, was the hardest thing to deal with. The lack of peer contact, and therefore also that lack of motivation. We also found quite a lot of commentary about a sense of anxiety and hopelessness about the future, which permeated then their general experience of being online and became intertwined with the lack of contact.
So what they want is, and I quote your survey, safety, consistency, security and predictability. Not just students, but television news anchors also want that. How do we give it to them?
Indeed. So what we're going to do at the colleges that belong to the Independent Institute of Education on all our higher education campuses is to focus very much on creating an educational experience. So rather than a set of isolated lectures, to be sure that we are engaging with students in a more seamless fashion. So what we did towards the end of last year is that we upped a whole lot of our extramural activities, our student support, our counselling. We brought all of that into the classroom experience when we started to realize the psychological impact on students was very real. And so what we're going to do this year is in those instances in which we have to deal with the students online, is ensure that we create as much of a holistic experience as we can. Up the amount we communicate with them, up the amount we support them, and far faster reactions. It's a very difficult line. Young adults, whether or not they're attending, one doesn't want to create a nanny experience or a school-like experience and find out why they missed every lecture. But perhaps in the online environment, it is really important to be responding to them much quicker, and certainly that's what we're going to do.
You've referenced it, but I'll come back to it. It's also about future-fitting students. There's one quote in your communique that stands out for me, and it's this: I'm just worried about how this mess, and indeed it is a mess in many respects, will translate by the time we start working. So if we don't get it right at this tertiary level, it is going to impact on people's ability once they join the workforce.
Well, absolutely. What we've seen is several public universities now starting to talk about this notion of performativity. In other words, where the compromises in the assessment strategy mean that we're not as confident as we were that we fully understand the competencies that students have gained. And if we don't really get our heads around that, if we can't continue to make sure that students are mastering both the content and the competencies we want them to, then we set loose a set of graduates that don't have the skills and competencies that graduates had from a while ago. On the other hand, however, simply having got through last year, to have worked both physically and online, to have managed your own time, to have mastered productivity tools, to have engaged collaboratively, to have mastered 4 or 5 different online platforms, means that there are ways, and I don't think students always see this, that last year's students are perhaps more future ready than students from 2 years ago, where the notion of 21st century skills was an abstract concept. It is something that these students have had to live, and it is certainly something that I think they may see the benefits of. So it's achieving that balance between the hard skills and the content that goes with a higher education experience, with the fact that we need to celebrate the learnings, ironically, that students have got in a far more intensive manner through this pandemic internationally than has been afforded to contact students generally.
And that is a good blueprint for the 2021 academic year. From the Independent Institute of Education, I'm going to thank Dr. Felicity Coughlan.